Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we are honored to be joined by Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, who is a longtime mentor of mine and helped me understand some of the basics of natural medicine many decades ago. So welcome and thank you for joining us, Dr. Klinghardt.
Thanks, Joe. It's an honor to be here.
So for those who don't know who you are, maybe you can give a brief history of your training, and then we'll go to some other.
All right. Well, I went to medical school in Germany. I'm actually born in Berlin. I'm a real Berliner. And then went to medical school. And after medical school for 3 years, I worked on a thesis, which at the time I wasn't sure, but it actually became very important because the subject was how the autonomic nervous system communicates with the immune system. At the time, nobody wanted to take that on, and so I got an award for it. And so, you know, when other people do residency, I did a residency in surgery, but only for 2 years. And then
the normal residency is like 8 years or something, something crazy, 6 or 8 years, right?
Yeah. Anyway, so after I completed my thesis and defended it successfully, I spent 2.5 years in India working at a medical center there, where I really gained a lot of experience, especially regards to parasites and infections. So that became sort of my passion all the way through. And then, you know, I spent almost a year in England apprenticing with the wonderful man, James Syriacs, who was the father of non-invasive orthopedic medicine. The prolotherapy he had pioneered, and the many injection techniques and many manipulative techniques. And so that became part of my arsenal of things. And then I moved to the US and passed my exams, and I've been here almost 40 years, I think 30, I haven't counted, 35 years.
Well, you split your time. You're not exclusively in the US, you're also in Germany and London?
Yeah, the last few years, I also practiced in England and Switzerland. I have a license in Switzerland where I started seeing patients. We managed, this is I think interesting, my group that I'm sort of involved with or supervising, we managed to change the constitution in Switzerland, where alternative medicine becomes the birthright of every Swiss citizen and cannot be denied by any authority to speak of. And that includes homeopathy, neurotherapy, acupuncture, all the healing techniques, hands-on healing techniques. And so it's the only country on the planet where complementary medicine or alternative medicine is the birthright of every citizen. And so when we managed to do that, I made sure I get a license in Switzerland as a escape place, as possible escape route from the forces that sometimes are very obstructive here.
Have you had any recent experiences with the federal regulators in the United States?
No, I've sort of have been dodging a few bullets, but not in the recent years. It's been peaceful. And I have to say, the state of Washington has been very generous to me on the different issues that may have come up I'm here in Washington State over 20 years. And so nothing serious has come up. So I'm very happy about that.
Great. So you're known for a number of different areas, and people come to see you from all over the world. Most of who have seen a large number of other clinicians before seeing you. Certainly Lyme disease is one of your specialties, and neurodegenerative diseases. And I'm wondering what the current range or the most common diseases that people are currently seeing you for.
Well, let's start with toxicity. So I have a very good friend, Dr. Richard Straube, who is the main toxicologist in Germany. And he developed the apheresis as a treatment. That's a blood washing procedure where you filter out the dirt from the blood, and then because the toxins in there are concentrated, you can analyze them with the affordable lab methods. And so using the same toxicology test 10 years ago, he found on average in the population 20 toxins over the threshold of detection. In just 10 years, that number has gone up to over 500, which is a shocking number. And he's actually just about to publish this research. He did the research on 1,200 patients. So it's one of the largest toxicology studies. And of course, the leader in the toxins is aluminum and barium and lithium and strontium. These are the things in the geoengineering mix that sort of rained down on us. And so because of that, and many of these toxins are really specifically mitochondrial toxins. I was always big on detox, but detox now is no longer like a hobby of mine. It's a survival strategy for everybody. And when we, you and I wrote this beautiful paper almost 20 years ago on how to use natural agents for detox. And those issues have become much, much more prominent. And basically, the old theory has held true. If you contaminate the body with man-made toxins, those are stored not everywhere, but in certain body compartments. They're compartmentalized. And in those body compartments that reach a certain threshold of toxicity, the immune system loses control over the microbes that are in that area. And these become the areas where the microbes are domiciled, whether it's Bartonella or Lyme or Babesia or herpes viruses or so. They're not everywhere at the same time. They're very strictly set up housekeeping in certain body compartments. And so, and there cannot be distinguished between the toxicity and the infections that they go together. It's a package deal. And we, recently, since 20 years, I've been harping on Lyme disease and developed treatments that do not involve antibiotics, because that is an absolute mistake to treat Lyme with antibiotics. That I would exempt the fresh tick bite. There is a place for antibiotics, but for chronic Lyme disease, there's absolutely no place for treating with antibiotics. We know too much about the microbiome now and how sensitive the structures are in us. And so the latest development in the last 2 years have been, my work with Judy Mikovits, who she was part of our think tank, that we had way back in 2006, 2007, and tried to alert us then at the fact that we all embedded in our DNA are retroviruses, and that certain environmental conditions disable our mechanisms to silence those viruses, and they've become active. And really in the last 10 years, all hell has broken loose with that. Retroviruses, the most well-known one is HIV, but there's hundreds of others, and they're all, most of them are immunosuppressive, or I'd like to prefer the term immunodisturbing. So some aspects of the immune system are upregulated, others are downregulated, and that makes us hugely vulnerable for Lyme spirochetes, for mycoplasma, for Bartonella. We completely have lost control over the microbial environment that was always there. The human condition has developed against the backdrop of a pretty hostile environment. First every dinosaurs and tigers and whatever, hostile creatures. But really the main hostility that we've encountered was from the microbial realm, and we slowly developed against the backdrop of parasites and of the microbes. And our immune system had to be ahead of the invasive forces. And so we've lost control now over that the last 10 years. And that is, in its nature, it's very, very serious.
Yeah. I had a chance to interview Dr. Mikovits a few months ago, and it was, I don't know that we posted yet, but it was an interesting interview. And I read her book on the retroviruses. It's interesting. It's almost like a novel or a spy novel.
Yeah.
Which she wrote it. So, but I want to go back to detox, because that was a pretty bold statement. That increase, and that increase was from 10 to 500 in the last.
No, from 20 to over 500 in 10 years.
Okay, so that's
so it's a dramatic increase.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, and that was done in the blood?
Yeah, well, the apheresis is like this. You have two intravenous needles, one in one arm and the other in the other arm. Mm-hmm. And from one arm, the blood is taken, put through a filter system, and then the filtered blood is re-injected in the other arm. And this goes on over 3 hours. And so the entire blood volume is washed several times. Okay. And this goes through thousands of miles of little capillaries that filter out the gunk. And then what you're left with is this filtrate. It's called eluate. And the eluate, the trouble in toxicology is that there is really no dose dependency between a toxin in the blood and your reactions that you have to it. Tiniest amounts can cause huge reactions, and smaller and larger amounts of some other things may not cause a reaction. And so the toxicology exams, that are affordable have all a certain threshold. You need to have a certain concentration in whatever you're testing before it can be detected. And so, he used the same exact toxicology test that he used 10 years ago when he found 20 toxins on average over the threshold. Mm-hmm. And this last study on 1,200 patients showed over 500. And that's an exponential increase that is not compatible with life. I have to say that very clearly, that I'm quoting people more intelligent than me. This is no longer compatible with life, the inner condition. And so detoxification, using the different methods that we have, is an absolute necessity to survive this absolutely insane time.
Yeah, and I want to go into some of the details, but just a quick question first. Aren't most of those toxins fat soluble? I was just confused why they would. I mean, I know there's some equilibrium in the blood, but most of them would be the fat. And that's part of the problem, because you must have to do a fat biopsy to really get a good analysis of what's going on.
Yeah, well, the lab of Dr. Lassiter in Texas has been shut down. That was the lab we commonly used for the fat analysis. And it's very, very hard to, toxicology is not nurtured in this country. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's other toxins. There is thimerosal, which prides itself in being water soluble, and glyphosate is water soluble. So two of the major toxins are water soluble, and they travel very quickly in compartments other than the brain or the fatty tissues. They like to get stuck in the kidneys and in the lungs and in the bones. So the fat-soluble toxins, is pretty much all the benzene derivatives, the insecticides, pesticides, herbicides. They like to settle in the fatty tissue, which makes them potent neurotoxins, because your brain, everybody's brain is mostly just fat. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of where things settle. And so both of them require different methods of detoxification.
Okay, so what are some of your favorite approaches for, I mean, I guess there's two components here. One is the everyday person, because this is an exposure that virtually all of us have and
Mm,
should be doing on a regular basis if we seek to avoid these diseases in the future, especially the neurodegenerative diseases. I'm thinking that, you know, our paper 20 years ago was on chlorella, and I've
mm,
been a long fan of that, and I take about 15 grams a day, which is
mm.
about 50 tablets, I think,
Yeah,
and then near infrared sauna. So what do you like, or do you recommend that is a good strategy for most people to consider?
yeah. The you know, there is thousands of toxins. It's estimated that every one of us has well over 20,000 different chemicals in us, that have to be carefully separated from each other so they don't react with each other. And so, but amongst all those, there's two toxins that have emerged as the key culprit, and that's glyphosate and aluminum. And they actually work very nicely together to destroy our brains. And so let's first talk about glyphosate. So the glyphosate is an analog of the amino acid glycine, and attaches in the body in places where we actually need glycine. Now, glycine we don't have enough of, because glycine is part of many detox enzymes, and they're all overworked. And in the process of that, glycine is used up. And there is, for most of us, not enough in the nutrition to defend us against taking up glyphosate. Glyphosate is pretty much in every food now that we eat, even organic food. I get into that in a moment. And so we try to saturate the system with glycine. It's like a teaspoon, a flat teaspoon twice a day. It tastes like sugar,
That's
and
a
it's very
lot of
well.
glycine. A teaspoon?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
take I take a half a tea. No, I think yeah. No, I take an eighth of a teaspoon twice a day, but
yeah, yeah. So,
and
but
that's
what
like
you,
a gram.
yeah, but what you will see if you take the larger amount, immediately the glyphosate in the urine goes up. Yeah, that's what we want. We want
Really?
the glyphosate in the urine. We don't want it in your brain.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so at least for a while, we use high doses of glycine. There's no issues with it. There's no problems with it. And the other one that has been published is admittedly only a chicken study that shows that humic acid and fulvic acid can completely clean up the organ systems of a chicken. So, you know, chicken feed is full of glyphosate, and so chicken absorb glyphosate, and it travels to the brain, to the liver, to the bones, to pretty much every organ system. And it was a surprise that humic acid and fulvic acid can take that out very quickly.
Well, let's go back
So
to the glycine again, because you recommend a pretty high dose, a teaspoon. That's let's see,
it's
a,
4 grams, a flat teaspoon.
I thought it might be more than that. But anyway, so 4 grams. How long do you recommend that dose? Certainly not indefinitely.
Well, really, it depends on what the eating habits were of a person.
Okay.
If let's kind of go back to that. You know, so in the U.S., the organic food has 80% of the same glyphosate content as non-organic food. That was, as far as I remember, measured with Whole Foods organic food, which may not be a representative, but we have a way also of measuring the geoengineering clouds on the sky. And there's not only aluminum in there and strontium and barium, but there's also glyphosate in there. So it is rained down on us. There's retroviruses in it and glyphosate, you know, so we had that examined. And so that's why even organic fields, you know, get rained on, and the ambient air, you know, the metals and things that are sprayed up in the higher regions of the atmosphere don't stay there. They come down and they settle on the fields and on the bodies of water on the planet. The whole oceans are covered with it. And so it's a big disaster. It's a military program that pretty much exists outside the democratic institutions. There's no oversight from it. And it's 42 countries are doing it. And It's a big mess. And so you can't really get away from glyphosate unless you have a greenhouse, but even you have to water the plants, and now the nanoparticles make it pretty much through all the conventional filter systems. And so if you water your plants, you've got nanoparticles in there, little tiny plastic beads spiked with aluminum and other things. And so, and glyphosate, that's it only appeared in the last 2 or 3 years. And
I just recently reviewed the toxicology report, not the water report from my local community, and the number one toxin in there is glyphosate. I mean, by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. It was crazy.
Yeah. So it's kind of shocking. And, I'm a great fan of the work of Stephanie Seneff, who has really like single-handedly exposed this particular issue. And even though there is thousands of other toxins, glyphosate really takes the number one position. And I think everybody alive, there was a survey done recently on the health of America. And out of the 50 countries that were surveyed in terms of general health, the US were in position number 49. In spite of your teaching, I know you have had a huge influence on the health of this country, but it's still too small a group, however many million people that may be, but we need more, and the child mortality, the US is in position number 29, behind Mexico and other places that we consider inferior to the US. And so that's entirely been linked to the use of glyphosate. It's sprayed on the fields, and because it's water soluble, it washes down with the rain, gets in the rivers, and gets distributed widely. Oceans are full of it, and it doesn't disintegrate for a very, very long time. So that, that's what we do. We do the humic acid, fulvic acid, that's peat extract basically, from the high moors.
Sure.
And we do the glycine for a while, and we monitor the urine output of glyphosate, and then when that slows down, in some people it's 2 months, and other people it's 6 months, then we back off on the glycine and go to a smaller dose of that. Okay, and then the aluminum. Now, the aluminum is far more sinister. So aluminum can exist in the body in a 1+ form, 2+, and 3+ form, like iron. And Stephanie Seneff has shown that aluminum, when it gets in the matrix, the extracellular space, completely changes the voltage on the cell walls, the voltage gated channels, and has a profound effect on the microstructure, the microskeleton of our matrix, and basically impairs the receptors that we have on the cell wall, hormone receptors, neurotransmitter receptors, and whatever else we have, insulin receptors. They all get messed up by aluminum. As a really, really strong effect, stronger than any other toxin. And Stephanie Seneff shows that, glyphosate is a chelating agent. And so when you have glyphosate in the food, it binds all the trace minerals, and they're no longer available for absorption. So it depletes us of trace minerals. However, there's one exception, and that's aluminum. It works like a shuttle agent for aluminum. So it binds to aluminum, takes the aluminum across the gut wall into the tissues, and distributes it wildly, and distributes it in a chaotic way in the system. The thyroid, the thyroid epidemic that we're witnessing, everyone is hypothyroid. That's glyphosate in the thyroid. The leaky gut is the glyphosate in the food, but paired with aluminum. So aluminum, unfortunately, or aluminium, as we say in England or Germany, aluminium, unfortunately, as being a metal, has a affinity for nervous system. So It ends up in the brain, it ends up in the spinal cord, in the enteric nervous system of the gut. And it blocks a lot of healthy, vital functions in our system. And to get to get aluminium out of the system is a little bit of an art. So Chris Exley, he's the main aluminum researcher in England, who is a friend of mine. He has found that silica is the main ingredient that you need. You need to increase your silica intake. Now, he's, in my opinion, a bit misguided because he thinks just drinking Volvic water will do it. Well, Volvic water in the US, as we have it, is in plastic bottles. So it's full of phthalates and other things that come with plastic. So it's not acceptable here. In England, you can get Volvic water in glass bottles, which may be an acceptable option. So, but to increase silica, we use, first of all, we use different herbs. And interesting enough, one of the highest silica containing herbs is cilantro. And Omura did a study, 20 years ago, where he showed that he could decrease the aluminum content in an animal model very, very quickly by giving this cilantro extract. So horsetail is the other well-known herb that's high in silica. And we use a product from Belgium here that's liposomal silica, that's a biocell. So that's one part, but also citric acid has been shown to mobilize aluminum, and that's basically lemon juice. So we recommend people make a bottle of water in the morning and squeeze a lemon in it and drink it throughout the day. Malic acid is another one that's published. That's apple cider vinegar, but you can buy now malic acid in capsule form, or use magnesium malate, as your favorite form of magnesium that combines some of the benefits. And, for the medical docs, we use Desferal. It's an injectable that's injected once a week subcutaneously. It's an excellent detoxer. However, there's some questions whether it crosses the blood-brain barrier or not. Silica does, but Desferal probably not. But you can debulk the aluminum in the body with the once-a-week injection. So those are, sort of my top of the list 2 things. And the rest then is the fat solubles, which really mobilize.
Before we jump to the fat soluble, just let's finish up on aluminum, because that is an important one. So when you're supplying the body with silica, either horsetail, cilantro, and it takes it out of the tissues, is it in equilibrium with the brain, or do you need a special transport to remove it out of the brain?
It certainly crosses the blood-brain barrier. And we see remarkable improvements over time in brain function when we do it. By the way, I forgot to mention, but there's long been known that when you do a metallurgic exam on various cancers, especially breast cancer, or it's always full with mercury and aluminum, and they both have a devastating synergistic effect.
Okay, well, thanks.
And so, maybe the sources here. So the main source of aluminum is the ambient air, right above us, but it makes it in every body of water. And for example, in Germany, there was Angela Merkel ordered that about 5-6 years ago, that all the water stations had to update their filtration equipment so it can take nanonized aluminum out. This is very, very well known in the water science that we have a problem with that, and it's kind of forbidden to talk about where the aluminum comes from, but every air report, is like hundreds of times more than it should be, and every water report then is hundreds of times more. However, maybe also to say this, in the US, we do not have a lab that can demonstrate the nanonized aluminum. So nanonized aluminum is in very, very small amounts, very, very toxic, but it's below the threshold that is given to the labs where they can report it. And so we use the oligoscan, you probably know that one, consistently demonstrates the high levels of aluminum in our patients.
Will you be able to use a RO filter, or you require distillation to remove the nanonized aluminum from the water?
Honestly, I don't know. There is the question that even distillation, that even distilling it, the nanoparticles make it across, with the vapor, and with RO, RO doesn't clean up everything.
Right.
Even with fluoride, even fluoride is difficult to get out. And by the way, there is also a synergy between fluoride and aluminum. They're both, fluoride takes aluminum into the pineal gland. And so we have an absolute disaster here, in the US with the fluoridation of drinking water, the persistent contrails, the spraying of aluminum on the sky, and the glyphosate in the food. It's a perfect storm to cripple the population, to get the vitality down, to get the children's IQ down. It's all published, they're not my ideas. And America's not the country that it was when I moved here. It was beautiful when I moved here 35 years ago. It was a gorgeous country. And so it has sort of committed some form of suicide,
Well, the suicide, I don't know if it's suicide, it's probably more likely homicide, because people are doing it themselves. I mean, these challenges are forced upon people. It's not something they electively choose.
Yeah.
All right. So I interrupted you earlier. We were talking about the fat soluble toxins.
Yeah. So the fat soluble toxins in our work take second seat to these other two. Mm-hmm. And I believe, sort of that the mix of sauna detox and putting good binders on board is the solution of that. One thing that's overlooked in the US, whenever you talk about detox, people mention the kidneys, they mention the liver, but the largest detox organ in the body is the small intestine. It has a filtrating surface of 2 tennis courts. And so what's overlooked with sauna therapy is when you actually start sweating in the sauna, yes, the 2 square meters of skin start sweating, but there is hundreds of square meters of small intestine that also start sweating. They start hugely increasing the output and exchange circulating toxins in the blood into the fiber of the food. And that's the fiber in the food is a binder, but it's not a very efficient binder. And so we like, just like you do, have people take regular doses of chlorella and maybe some other binders. We like Eclonia cava, that's a brown algae. We like Anterus gel, that's methylated silica. And there's zeolite, so these would be the top 4. We like to load the system with that. And then when you do sauna therapy, you're sweating out internally a lot of toxic crap that's bound up by the binders. And then on the way down, you don't reabsorb it. Like that's what happens if you don't have a binder on board. And so I do feel by doing that regularly and watching the bowel transit time, that should be 24 hours or less. That means if you eat something, it should, or if you swallow something that's not digestible, it should come out on the other end within 24 hours. And we have some patients, where we measured the transit time, and it was like 36 days, or 20 days or so. And then those people are not able to excrete through the small intestine, and they're really doomed. And so that becomes a priority then to get the digestion going. And that's mostly a parasite issue, that is sort of my other hobby, to diagnose and treat parasites.
Are there any sort of shotgun all-purpose strategies to address some of the parasites that we invariably seem to be exposed to?
In biology, it is known that many parasites, especially worms, but even candida, even fungi, absorb multiple of their body weight and toxins into their coat, into their cell wall, or into their skin, so to say. And for example, like many worms are able to concentrate lead 300-fold compared to the tissues of the host. And in the proper word of saying that is that the parasite load of a particular person is a bioindicator for the toxicity that this person lives in. Yeah, so for example, if you want to study the pollution levels in the ocean between Hawaii and Alaska, where the whales travel, rather than taking 1,000 probes of water and examining it, they simply collect the poop of a whale once. And if it's, and there's a certain proportion, and the more parasites are in there, the more toxic is the ocean that the animal swims in. Now, bringing that back to us, there is an incredible increase in parasite burden in the population now that goes directly together what I said before, that the amount of toxins in our connective tissue has dramatically gone up. And the way the US responded to that basically there's not a single lab that can diagnose the parasite burden. So we have a couple of ridiculous tests that may show some superficial bugs in the system, but we've had people that are complete negative parasite tests, and they're pooping out a tapeworm, a 16-foot tapeworm. Well, where was the tapeworm? So basically, we don't have a test for that. And so we use ART, my autonomic response testing, and we respond to what we find with using different cocktails of antiparasitic drugs. And that has been so rewarding. You know, every chronic Lyme patient is also full of parasites. And if you don't address those, it's been shown that the worms in a Lyme patient themselves are infected with Lyme spirochetes. So if you do antibiotic treatment that doesn't harm the parasites, the Lyme spirochetes simply retreat into the worms, wait until you're gone with the antibiotics, and then they're hatching back out. So the teaching is to treat from large to small. So in a chronically ill patient, always assume that there's parasites, treat them, and then kind of slowly go down. So in terms of treatment, the understanding that parasites are loaded with toxic metals and other toxins, you do not want to explode the parasites in the liver or in the brain or wherever they have strayed. You want to seduce them to leave those tissues and come into the gut where they can be safely expelled. And so we work with the Gubarev protocols. You know, these are enema protocols developed by Russian scientists to start with. And then when there is no more stuff coming out, then we switch to the oral agents. And for the lay people, we recommend the ozonated plant oils from BioPure. Yeah, there's a rhizole kappa and rhizole gamma. They're designed as wonderful, powerful antiparasitic treatments that have enormous properties. Now, one word for the medical drugs that I think is important, that recently there's an incredible increase in literature that shows that pretty much every medical antiparasitic can also be used for treating cancer. And I give you an example of that. You know, albendazole used to, a monthly treatment used to cost $80. Then the articles came out of cancer healings from it. Now it's $24,000 a month. Went from $80 to $24,000. Supply and demand. Welcome to America. You know, so it's there's some shocking developments, but we use the antiparasitic drugs for the multi-purpose drugs. You know, it happens to be that the internal pathways of a cancer cell are very similar to the pathways of the parasite. And so it's a very, very good policy to start chronic treatment early on, you know, before attending to Lyme disease or mycoplasma, to attend to the parasites. And this is what we find is the step in the US that everybody overlooks, because most people that don't have ART down, they have to depend on the lab, and the lab can only show what the lab is looking for. And this is on the parasite area very, very deficient.
Yeah, and certainly Dr. Simon Yu does a lot of work in that area. And I'm wondering, in your experience, a few things. One is if you find that the drugs are almost invariably required, the pharmaceutical drugs, and do you find a place for ozone therapy, either IV or what most patients can do at home, which is intrarectal or intravaginal if they're a woman?
Yeah, so we use all the tools, you know, but it's pretty clear that the old Hulda Clark regime, she was like the leader in the field, you know, in the 90s, to point us towards, hey, you know, if you have cancer, look at parasites. If you have chronic fatigue, look at parasites. She was a wonderful leader in that field, but her herbal remedies no longer are sufficient. It can all be done with herbs, but it's a lot of work and takes a long time, you know. And I tell you what the main issue with parasites is this: if you undertreat a parasite, it means you use a dose of an herb or medical drug that's not enough to kill it, but enough to make it sick. That parasite will put out a huge amount of biotoxins and make you really, really deathly ill. So the secret with parasite treatment is to come in high and strong from the beginning, so these creatures cannot shoot back at you. And that's what I've learned from Simon Yu and from other. There is a wonderful German parasitologist who has been my guide in this. It's a Western worldwide phenomenon right now, is the increase in parasite-related illness, and very rarely diagnosed, because, you know, parasites come only out in the poop if the parasite is sick. Yeah, parasites do not show up that way. So you can, if, you know, as long as they still live in the belly, in the gut, you can palpate and you can get certain signs that make it likely that you get the right diagnosis. But unfortunately, the larval stages of many parasites stray through the lung and also end up in the brain. You know, cysticercosis is the name given for that. Larval stages of tapeworms in the brain. We see that all the time. Kids that have seizures, most of the time it's that issue, you know, and they're easy to treat, you know, once you have your nose in it. But it's difficult to do it with the natural things. You know, we find that the natural herbs that are used are good, and we use them in conjunction with the medical drugs. Now, in terms of ozone therapy, of course, we use ozone left and right, and we actually prefer rectal ozone to the injection. And we have a lot of our patients buy an inexpensive ozone machine and do rectal ozone every day. I tell you why that is a phenomenal, effective thing. When I worked in India, I worked with the leading parasitologist in India, and we did a study where we had a rating scale of how ill people were. It went from 0 to 100. You know, there were 600 questions people had to fill out, plus some lab work, and so every one of our patients was rated on the scale from 0 to 100. And then we did what's called the colonic count. That means we counted. We just used the same test that you use for counting white blood cells in the blood smear. We did that with the poop of patients, and we did what's called internationally the colonic count of anaerobes. So, and there was a linear relationship. The more anaerobes there were in the poop, the sicker the person was. And now the treatment that we came up with at the time, well, we said, you know, why not put oxygen up there? So we didn't have ozone available, so we just pumped oxygen up the rear end, and it was very, very successful as a strategy to get people out of chronic illness. And so, and so I prefer that compared to the IV ozone, and I'll let you know why. You know, so there's some studies that were done in Germany. When you inject ozone into the vein, it's only 10 inches up detectable, and beyond that, it falls apart to oxygen. And so any of the effects that we assign to ozone therapy intravenously are really caused by the ozone. It's caused by the oxygen. And there is a German piece of equipment that simply bubbles oxygen into the veins, and that has better results than the ozone therapy. Now, I like ozone therapy in trigger points. I like it in joints. It's fantastic as anti-infectious agent, especially for anaerobic bugs, but it really has no effect on parasites.
And dental infections too.
Dental infection, fantastic, you know, to inject it around the jaw and to clean out the extraction sites, you know, with ozone. Has a fantastic, it also increases blood flow. And when you inject it locally, some of the great successes with that seem to be linked more to the increased blood flow than the antimicrobial properties. And you probably know, I mean, one of the key secrets in ozone therapy is when you inject ozone anywhere in the body, IV or in trigger points or wherever you put it, it elicits an antioxidative response by the body. You know, so when your genes have been asleep, to create enough antioxidants, enough glutathione, enough melatonin, you just inject ozone in the area, it wakes up. It's like an epigenetic influence that flips some switches, and your body starts creating more antioxidants. So paradoxically, you know, ozone is a strong pro-oxidant, but the healing response for many of its applications is actually antioxidative. There's a lot of research on that. You know, as far as I know, most of it is German, but there is, you know, increasingly use of this. So in Germany, it's been used since the turn of the last century, since the early 1900s, with a huge body of literature in German. And so now we have, fortunately, slowly things are changing. We get more literature in English on that.
So aside from improving the antioxidant or decreasing oxidative stress through that mechanism, you're also going to optimize your microbiome through this.
Absolutely, yes.
Good strategy. Well, thank you for that. And we discussed this in a previous podcast where you had highlighted the information about EMF and recommended it universally for everyone and expose some of the dangers that are coming, especially with 5G and the ones that are existing now. So I'm wondering how you just comment briefly on the integration of the EMF strategies into the parasites and the detox mechanism you talked about.
Yeah, so one thing that's often overlooked, you know, my friend Marco Ruggiero published on this, that actually the Wi-Fi damages the microbiome in us far more than it damages our own cells. And that, of course, has never been studied properly because everybody looks at the cells, you know, and you know, we know that when you count the DNA, only 2% of what we see is our own DNA, and 98% of what's in our body is foreign DNA from the microbes. And they're severely damaged. Many of them are severely damaged in resonance with the...
That would make sense because it's been documented clearly that it affects plants, insects, and animals. So why wouldn't it affect bacteria?
I know, and I think that is the most important issue, of course, of our time, is the fact that we're destroying not just the microbiome in us, but the microbiome of the earth. You know, so wherever there's cell phone reception, we know now that 80% of the insects have disappeared, 75% of the songbirds, and that's entirely untrue. What we're told is not the nicotinides and the other, you know, insecticides. They play a role, but the big one is the Wi-Fi, because we know in Canada there's areas where they still spray insecticides, but there's no cell phone reception. And the bees are completely well there. You know, the other insects are thriving and the songbirds are thriving. So it's the Wi-Fi that is destroying life on the planet. There's absolutely no question. And then unfortunately, titanium and aluminum in our system act like an antenna for the Wi-Fi. You know, there's a beautiful study is on amalgam. You know, so when you have an amalgam filling and you make a phone call on that side where the filling is, you evaporate the speed at which mercury is evaporated from the tooth multiple times. so we, you know, basically we hold the position that a body needs to be metal free in order to survive this crazy time. And, you know, the 2.4 gigahertz was selected for sinister reasons. And the 5G isn't 5G, it's 4.8G. So it's just simply the doubling the frequency, which was technically very easy to do. And in general, in medicine, it's very well known, when you have a damaging frequency and you use a higher octave from it, it's exponentially more damaging than the original frequency. So we're heading for something there. But in terms of protection, we recommend the building biology approach to shield the home, to shield the windows. If as a compromise, we use a sleep sanctuary. It's basically a mosquito net over the bed. We're propagating the smart use of the stupid phone. Only texting and as far away from the body as possible. One phone call, I forgot, it was, I think a 7-minute phone call activates the Epstein-Barr virus for many years. You know, that's published. One phone call activates Epstein-Barr for years, you know, and all of us have that virus in us. And so, yeah, if you want to have chronic fatigue, you know, that's a great recipe. So, but there is some internal protection that you can do. You know, the things published is tincture of rosemary, tincture of propolis. Those are the big ones.
Yeah. So, but just one point on the shielding though, that typically works for a little below a gigahertz to maybe 8 gigahertz. But it probably is not going to work for when 5G gets implemented, which would be like 30 gigahertz, 50 gigahertz or so. But the other issue is that what exists now, and you're certainly aware of, and you had David Stetzer at your presentation earlier this year in New Jersey, is the dirty electricity with these high voltage transits, which typically are far less than gigahertz. They're typically 100, 1 kilohertz to 1 or 100 kilohertz, you know, about 1/10 of 1 gigahertz. So, and they supposedly capacitively couple far more effectively than the higher frequencies into the body. So,
well, there's also the issue with the Tetra network. You know, that's what the police is using, and the ambulances. It's absolutely devastating. It goes through everything. You cannot shield from that. So there's, you know, it's limited, but the damage, you know, is cumulative. So whatever the exposures are in 24 hours, the damage accumulates. We already know from the primary test that we did that we can there's a direct linear relationship between the exposure, the cumulative exposure to man-made radiation and chronic illness. You know, there's a direct linear relationship. The more you're exposed to, the more ill you are. And so, and this is, has to be modified when people are metal toxic. They concentrate radiation in them, and so, and then it goes up exponentially, you know. But in general, this is overlooked at how much chronic illness is directly outcome of that. And then, you know, I mentioned before, if you put aluminum in the equation, and the, you know, the fuel that airplanes are using is still leaded, so the lead doesn't stay up there. It comes down. And so we all have daily exposures, of aluminum and that settles in the tissues and makes us a living antenna for Wi-Fi and Tetra and the ambient electromagnetic fields and electric fields and the dirty electricity. And so this strategy should be this, and I know you're working on a book to give people guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the most important book ever written, where people learn how to minimize their exposures without giving up their life.
That's the challenge because of the convenience. The people are swapping convenience for health issues that they don't anticipate will affect them. They'll somehow escape it because for whatever reason. They're just deluded belief, but that's what they believe. Most people, and I was in that camp for the most part until you catalyzed my consciousness into appreciating this at a deeper level. So thanks.
Yeah, we learned that from the autistic kids, just to say that, we have two groups of autistic kids. We got the ones that get well and the ones that don't. And the ones that get well are the ones where the parents take my guidance and shield, and it's just as clear like day and night. And it's shocking that there's not more known, and the obstacle in that the group that doesn't do it is usually the husband who is the obstacle, that says, well, I'd rather have my kid die than giving up the wireless connection, that's basically, so it comes down to that.
Yeah, just the inability to believe that I don't believe they're consciously making that choice. They just don't suspect that it's true, and they're not going to be bothered.
Yeah. But that's going to be up to you as an educator to get that point across, and I know you will manage. Nobody else has managed to get the point across.
The challenge is quite substantial, largely as a result of the telecommunications industry, which is far more powerful than big pharma and big food combined, which is not really fully appreciated. So they've controlled these federal regulatory agencies, the scientists, the media, and it's a real effective strategy. There was this book that reviewed it, and I forgot the name of the book, but it was an old book. It was out about 7-8 years ago. They actually have a movie on Amazon Prime where they reviewed the tobacco strategies and the same ones that is a telecommunications service. Essentially merchandising doubt or creating doubt, I think is in the title. So essentially that's the first step, is to create doubt in people's mind. So, and they were able to do that with the tobacco companies for like 30 years after the U.S. federal regulatory authorities, the CDC and the FDA, both pronounced that cigarette smoking causes cancer. They still went on for another 30 years and created doubt. Here, those agencies aren't admitting that. They're in complete alliance with the industry.
It's a false information that's seeded, on thousands of websites and things. There's a lot of effort goes into that.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for your time. I know you got to get back to seeing patients and sharing with us all your not all, but a really helpful wisdom that you've acquired from decades of treating very sick patients. So if someone wanted more information, there's two groups. Would be one as a patient, the other as professionals. What would you recommend as a choice? The Klinghardt Institute or the Sophia Clinic?
Klinghardt Institute is sort of my intellectual website, and Sophia Health Institute is where I treat people. Let me say one more last thing, Joe. So the combined effect of the toxicity and the Wi-Fi has unleashed these viruses, they're called human endogenous retroviruses. And that is really ultimately what's causing the severity of chronic illness. And so I just wanted to get that in you at the end. So when you mitigate all those influences, at the very end, you still have to silence the retroviruses. And it's not difficult, but it's sort of...
What do you like for that? I think Judy has mentioned one of these anti-malarial drugs, not the one you mentioned earlier, but a different one.
Yeah, there is several approaches. You know, plants have been exposed to the same viruses, and they have developed 350 million years longer than what we have had time plant adaptogens against it. And so I created an herbal mix. It's called Retro V powder that has 10 herbs in it that's published that are superior to the AIDS drugs in silencing the retroviruses. That's a key science, KI science makes that. And then, you know, the cistus tea is published, the powerful tool against retroviruses. And then the broccoli sprouts, you know, so that those are the three major things. And then once in a while, for a few months, we use Truvada or one of the other antiretroviral medical drugs. But there's amazing, chloroquine. There's some antibiotics that have retroviral effects. There's a whole host, but by focusing on that, somewhere along the treatment of chronic illness has allowed us big breakthroughs and a lot of people where we were stuck. And I do get stuck with patients also, you know, like we get a hard selection. The average patient that we see has seen 32 other physicians before us. And so sometimes it takes a while to crack it, and that's certainly how I'm learning, and that's how I discovered the value of Judy Mikowitz's teaching. You know, she is definitely maybe, you know, the most important person. The other thing, you know, sort of that, just to round that off, is increasingly in the literature is the recognition that many illnesses are caused by prions, you know, self-folding proteins. That's ALS and Parkinson's, you know, and there are some wonderful simple treatments that are published. I'm not going to go into that now, but that's those two steps, attending to the retroviruses and attending to the prions, has given us the biggest breakthrough, you know, in probably 10 or 15 years, you know, since discovering the importance of Lyme. You know, we harped on that for a long time, but now we're off to a whole other field.
Sure. Retrovirology.
Yeah.
Molecular biology, which is always fun.
Yeah.
Well, I want to express my deep gratitude for all the work you've been doing and have done and will continue to do, and for helping so many people understand some of these foundational basics that can help them recover their health, which is really the most precious commodity.
Thank you, Joe. Good seeing you. Good talking to you.